welcome back to my channel, Beautiful Minutia. If you're new here, my name is Tiffany, and today I wanted to talk to you about some books that I feel like are must-reads this fall. So if you're the kind of person where when fall comes around, you really want something cozy and comforting that you can curl up with, I have some options for that. But I'm also going to have a section if during the fall time you go for more creepy or gothic vibes. I got you covered there too. Let's kick off with some cozy books. So a book that I am currently rereading right now is The Hobbit by J.R.R. Tolkien. I think most people have heard of this book, especially because there have been Lord of the Rings movies and Hobbit movies, and I think Lord of the Rings are also a very solid choice for fall books, especially because Fellowship of the Ring kicks off in September. So it's a good option for that as well, but there's something especially cozy about The Hobbit. I think maybe it's because it was written for children, so it feels a little bit more cozy maybe than Lord of the Rings. I feel like Lord of the Rings has cozy elements, but to me overall, it doesn't feel quite as cozy as The Hobbit does. So in The Hobbit, we open with a hobbit who loves peaceful, cozy living and then gets kind of dragged into going on this adventure with these dwarves to recover some stolen treasure from a dragon. And they go throughout the land and have many adventures to get to their final adventure to recapture this gold. There's lots of beautiful language, lots of sense of place. There's even some poetry and songs intermixed and lots of adventure. So I feel like this is a book that has a little something for everyone. Another children's classic that I'd like to recommend is Charlotte's Web. And I feel like Charlotte's Web is a book that everyone should read, whether or not you are a child. I know lots of people did read it in their childhood, but it's shocking how many adults I've talked to that have said that they've never read Charlotte's Web. I think Charlotte's Web is so special. It is the story of these animals on a farm, and there's a little girl named Fern, and she saves the runt of this litter of piglets from her father and raises him. And as he gets older, he ends up befriending a spider named Charlotte who wants to help him because they find out that he's probably going to end up butchered for meat. And so they come up with some elaborate plans to try to rescue him. There are lots of fall festival elements as there's like state fairs and stuff like that. So I feel like it feels really fall in addition to it feeling very cozy. One of my favorite books that I read last year is Agnes Grey by Anne Bronte. And this is a short little book, a Victorian classic that's actually pretty slow moving, where we follow Agnes, whose father is a minister, and he has some difficulties, some health issues, and so now the family need to get extra jobs to help support them. So Agnes goes out and becomes a governess, and we follow her as she's with a couple different families who are kind of terrible, honestly, but it's really fun to see her resilience and her courage in the midst of some difficult and trying circumstances. But in addition to that, there's a really lovely love story in here as well that has so much more to do with her falling in love with someone because of their kindness, not their physical appearance or their wealth, but how they treat other people around them. And that is one of the things that I found the most cozy about this book. So you might think that this book should go on the creepy side, but I would actually disagree, and that is The Legend of Sleepy Hollow by Washington Irving. There have been a lot of creepy adaptations made of this book, but I think the tone of this story overall is one that's pretty humorous. In case you haven't heard of The Legend of Sleepy Hollow, it is about this really gangly, awkward school teacher who falls in love with this beautiful girl who happens to be the daughter of one of the most wealthy men in town, and that causes him to encounter some rivals of people who are interested in this beautiful rich girl. This story has, like I said, lots of elements of coziness, but it's extremely descriptive, and so there's a lot of nature descriptions, a lot of humorous descriptions, but in addition to that, there is like this really big banquet that Ichabod Crane is invited to, and the description of the food. Oh my goodness, it's marvelous. The next book that I want to recommend is one that I read this summer, but I don't think that it's strictly a summery book. I think it actually probably suits fall a little bit better, and that's Howl's Moving Castle by Diana Wynne Jones. I think a lot of people have seen the Studio Ghibli movie, and actually I did a vlog where I read the book and then I watched the movie, compared the two, talked about which one I liked better. But I feel like the book has a lot of just very cozy, magical vibes that fit the fall season super well. So in this story, there's a young girl named Sophie who is a hat maker, and she ends up being cursed by the Witch of the West to look like an old woman. And so she flees from her family and ends up trying to figure out where she's gonna go, what she's gonna do, all these things. And she ends up in a magical castle that moves around and is owned by the wizard Hal, who has a really bad reputation. So the story just goes from there, and it has lots of magical elements, lots of elements of found family, and it is super cozy and whimsical and delightful. Another book I read this summer that I actually feel is super well suited to fall is Welcome to Hyunamdong Bookshop. This is translated from Korean, and it is about this young girl who has been working really, really hard in the industry in Korea and ends up kind of dropping out of the rat race because she just feels like it's too much, and she ends up opening this bookshop. And this bookshop ends up being healing not only for her, but a lot of people who end up coming in or people who end up working for her. And it's really kind of examining, like, what does it mean to have a successful life or a life well lived, and lining it up with society's expectations versus what actually makes you happy and brings you fulfillment in your life. In addition to those elements, there's a coffee shop inside of this bookshop, and a lot of talk about coffee and roasting beans and the best way to brew coffee, and I think that makes this book feel even cozier. Another translated book, but translated from Japanese, is The Kamigawa Food Detectives. I also recently read this book, and I feel like it is so perfectly suited to cozy weather. It's about a detective who has retired from the police force, and now he owns a restaurant with his daughter, and they do consultations for people who have eaten meals that they have really fond memories of and they're not able to have anymore. Whether it's because the restaurant has closed down and they can't find another restaurant that cooks it exactly the same way, or maybe it was a meal that was made for them in their childhood and they haven't been able to recreate it since. The detective goes and he finds the elements of this dish and then he makes it for them. This sounds very much like a cozy mystery, but there's really not a whole lot of detecting or mystery to it because we have the people who come in for their consultation and then we kind of time jump to 2 weeks later where they come back in to taste the dish that's been made for them. So if you're going into this looking for like mysterious elements, you probably will not find that. But if you're going into this book for coziness and just an atmosphere of delicious food being described and you love Japanese food, this is a book you'll really like. And the last cozy that I want to suggest to you, I feel like it would be a shame to not include some Ella Montgomery on this list because I feel like she is so cozy, and I feel like everyone thinks of Anne of Green Gables in the fall time because it has that famous quote, "I'm so glad I live in a world where there are Octobers." I don't think that Anne is fall only because I feel like each of the books follows entire seasons, and so does this next book that I'm going to recommend. But I'm going to actually recommend Emily of New Moon, which is a trilogy that has some similarities to Anne of Green Gable in that we follow Emily, who is an orphan who is forced to go live with her spinster aunts and uncle on a farm. She's also super imaginative and also wants to become a writer, much like Anne. But I feel like Emily's story has darker tones and deals with some more heavier emotional things, and so as a result I think that it has just a slightly almost like gloomier feel to it at times, not constantly but at times, and I think that makes it really conducive for fall and coziness as well. Okay, let's move on to the more creepier books. The first one I want to suggest is actually not that creepy, I don't think, but it has moments of intensity. And that's a book I'm currently rereading, and that's Crime and Punishment by Fyodor Dostoevsky. If Russian literature scares you, I actually did a video recently telling you what you can expect with Dostoevsky, so you can check that out to kind of allay some of your fears and see if maybe this is something that's for you. But Crime and Punishment is about an axe murderer, essentially, but instead of this being a whodunit, we actually follow the murderer from the very beginning and follow him throughout the murder, which happens towards the beginning of the book. So this book ends up examining him very deeply psychologically, and so as a result, rather than it being a whodunit, it's a why did he do it, because it seems like he's pretty unsure as to why he did it as well, and bounces back and forth all over these different moral and ethical and philosophical questionings of himself. I think it's so deep, and I think that the murder element makes it really good for fall as well. I feel like no fall list is complete without suggesting some Edgar Allan Poe. And a lot of people are going to talk about things like The Telltale Heart or The Fall of the House of Usher, or even some of his detective stories. All of those are really good options. But I want to recommend a short story to you that is one of my favorites that I discovered a couple years ago and I've never heard anyone talk about. It's called The Case of M. Valdemar. And this story is about someone who's kind of doing some experiments surrounding hypnosis. And it's really short, and it ends in a classic Poe way where you're like, oh, that is not where I thought we were going with this. But I just loved it. It just gripped me, and I think about it all the time. Another book that is often suggested on these lists is Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier, and I totally think that du Maurier is perfect for fall. So if you've not read Rebecca, you should pick that up. But a nice counterpart is 9 Coaches Waiting by Mary Stewart. And this also has a very gothic mystery feel to it. And it definitely is like romantic suspense in some ways, much like Daphne du Maurier's books end up being. I found it had a lot of similarities. So this is actually about a young lady who is a governess, and she ends up working for this rich family in France. She's taking care of a little boy, and over time she just kind of has this feeling that something's not quite right here, and she uncovers some plots. And it reminds me of quite a few du Maurier books, in that we've got like a young naive protagonist who kind of gets thrust into this situation where something isn't quite right and she has no idea what she's getting into. The vibes are perfect for fall. One of my favorite books of last year that I read last fall is Something Wicked This Way Comes by Ray Bradbury, and this is perfect for fall. It definitely has some really creepy elements, as it's about 2 young boys and the circus comes to town, and they kind of realize that something is not right with the circus and weird things are happening. And so there's a lot of spooky and creepy things that are happening. But at the same time, there's some really deep conversations about themes about love overcoming evil and the passage of time, and people who want to go back in time and wish they were younger, or people who are young who wish they could age faster. And so there's a lot of really deep and meaningful themes discussed here, and I feel like that is Bradbury's strong suit. Another book I read last fall and I was obsessed with is Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell. This is a chunker, but I also feel like fall is a good time for thick books too, because it's cozier weather to cozy up with it. So Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell is about 2 magicians who want to see a resurgence of the practicing of magic in England, where most of the magicians are just people who study magic but have never practiced it themselves. So it has a pretty Dickensian feel to it in its setting and in the way that it's written, and in the way that it has like lots of footnotes, but the footnotes are like referencing like fake magical works that actually don't exist in our world. And it does take place during the Napoleonic Wars, so there's some elements of that as well, but it goes really, really dark at times. But the way that it ended up concluding just absolutely blew my mind, and there was just a lot of really deep thoughts that I had about it, and I just loved it. Another spooky book. I am not really a horror person, and this is one of the authors that does horror in a way that is spooky and unsettling, but I can still read it. And that's T. Kingfisher. The book of hers that I read that is my favorite also kind of ties in with Edgar Allan Poe, because it is a Poe retelling, and that is What Moves the Dead. I read this earlier this year in February, and I feel like it's such a perfect fall book. So like I said, it is a retelling of an Edgar Allan Poe book, Fall of the House of Usher, and it doesn't stay entirely faithful to that, because she takes a lot of elements that you see in The Fall of the House of Usher. So I actually recommend reading these together if you've not read The Fall of the House of Usher, because it's fun to go through and kind of like pick the Easter eggs and the inspiration that she received, but then she takes it in a totally different direction and makes it fresh and new as well. I think the character development is superb. It's actually really, really short, but it's incredible. Another gothic story is We've Always Lived in the Castle by Shirley Jackson. This follows 2 young girls, and I think their uncle is the other person that lives in this house, and they kind of stay in the castle because the townspeople have shunned them, and you don't know exactly what is going on here, but you know that the rest of this girl's family, they're gone. And so over time you kind of get some revelations as to what happens, and it is just really, really unsettling. Like the whole time, even when things feel like they're fine, you get like this current of unease that Shirley Jackson does so well. A lot of people love Shirley Jackson for The Haunting at Hill House, which I actually haven't read yet because I'm not usually as into ghosty type stories. So this one doesn't have really like the supernatural elements that one does, but I actually thought it was perfect. And the last story that I'm going to recommend here, I thought about recommending Frankenstein by Mary Shelley, but I feel like most people have read Frankenstein. So if you haven't, you should, because it's gothic and perfect and not at all like the Hollywood portrayals of Frankenstein we see nowadays. Has just like a lot of deep questioning in it that I really, really love and appreciate. But I thought I would recommend another classic monster story to you that I feel like I see less people read than Frankenstein, and that's Dracula by Bram Stoker. Dracula is just perfect for fall. I think I've read it several times, and every time I've read it has been in fall, and it just suits the vibe so perfectly. It's also kind of uniquely told in that we have journal entries, we have letters, I think we have some newspaper articles and stuff as well. So there's a lot of different ways that the story is pieced together, and that makes it really, really interesting. So I really love this story. I don't think that there's much that I could tell you that you probably don't already know, because it is about a vampire and his, seduction of young girls and the way that he tries to get people, and it gets like really, really intense, and I found it like edge of my seat. I really liked it. Well, those are some books that I would love to recommend for you to read this fall. If you've not read them before, now is the perfect time. If you have some suggestions of books that you feel like are best read in the fall, that everyone should read them in the fall, I would love to hear any suggestions that you might have in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, please hit like and also subscribe so you can continue to see more bookish content from me, and I will see you again next time.